The sun was setting behind the pine trees along Highway 85, casting long shadows across the empty road. It had been a quiet Tuesday evening shift for Officer David Chun until he spotted the black sedan in his rearview mirror. Something about the way it moved through traffic caught his attention, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Chun had been a police officer for 8 years, working the rural stretch of highway that connected the small town of Millbrook to Fort Hamilton, one of the largest military bases in the state. Most of his stops were routine: speeding tickets, broken taillights, the occasional drunk driver. Tonight felt different somehow. The sedan was traveling at a steady pace, staying in the right lane, following all traffic rules. Chun glanced at his radar gun, which showed varying speeds as cars passed by. When he pointed it at the black sedan, the numbers seemed to jump around, sometimes showing 65, sometimes 72, sometimes 58. The speed limit was 65, so technically, if the car was doing 72, that would be a violation. Chun made his decision and flipped on his patrol lights. Inside the sedan, Colonel Diana Roberts saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror and felt her heart sink. She had been driving for 6 hours straight, returning from an important meeting at the Pentagon. The classified briefing had run late, and she was eager to get back to base. Tomorrow was Monday, and she had a full day of meetings with her staff. Roberts was a career soldier who had worked her way up through the ranks over 15 years. She commanded a logistics battalion of over 800 soldiers and had earned respect throughout the military for her leadership and dedication. Her uniform jacket hung neatly in the back seat, and her military ID sat in the center console next to her driver's license. She pulled over to the side of the highway, turned off the engine, and placed her hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. This wasn't her first traffic stop, and she knew the drill. Stay calm, be respectful, follow instructions, and everything would be fine. Chun approached the vehicle, his flashlight in hand even though there was still enough daylight to see clearly. He had developed certain habits over the years, certain ways of reading situations that he believed kept him safe. When he saw the driver, a black woman in civilian clothes, his mind began forming assumptions. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you know why I stopped you?" Chun asked, shining his flashlight into the car. Roberts kept her hands visible and spoke clearly. "Good evening, officer. I'm not sure. I was watching my speed and staying in the right lane. I clocked you doing 72 in a 65 zone," Chun said, though he wasn't entirely certain of the reading. "License and registration, please." Roberts slowly reached for her purse, announcing her movements. "I'm reaching for my license now." She handed over her documents, which showed her address as on-base housing at Fort Hamilton. Chun looked at the license and felt a slight surprise. Military base address. But that didn't necessarily mean anything. Lots of civilian contractors and family members lived on base too. He walked back to his patrol car to run the license through the system. The background check came back clean. No warrants, no previous violations, no red flags. Roberts had a perfect driving record. But something about her demeanor bothered Chun. She seemed too calm, too controlled. In his experience, innocent people were usually more nervous, more apologetic. He returned to the car and handed back the documents. "Everything checks out," he said. "I'm going to give you a warning this time, but watch your speed." Roberts took her license back and nodded. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate the warning." She paused for a moment, then added, "I do need to report to base this evening. Is there anything else you need from me?" Something in her tone set Chun off. It sounded like she was trying to rush him, maybe even intimidate him with some kind of military connection. He had dealt with military personnel before who thought they were above civilian law enforcement. "What's the hurry?" Chun asked, his tone becoming more suspicious. "You got somewhere important to be?" Roberts sensed the shift in his attitude but maintained her calm demeanor. "I'm active duty military, and I have early meetings tomorrow. I just want to make sure I'm back on base at a reasonable time. Active duty, huh? Chun said, his voice taking on a skeptical edge. What do you do? I'm an officer at Fort Hamilton, Roberts replied simply. Chun felt his suspicions growing. She was being vague, not giving him specifics. In his mind, if she really was some kind of important military person, she would have said so right away. She would have shown him a military ID or mentioned her rank. The fact that she was being evasive made him think she was trying to play some kind of angle. Step out of the vehicle, please, Chun said suddenly. Roberts was surprised by the request, but complied. Of course, officer. May I ask why? Just routine, Chun said, though it wasn't routine at all. Something about this stop was bothering him, and he wanted to take control of the situation. As Roberts stepped out of the car, Chun noticed her posture, straight-backed, confident, the way she carried herself with authority. To him, it looked like defiance. It looked like someone who thought they were better than him. Are there any weapons in the vehicle? Chun asked. No, sir, Roberts replied. I'm not armed. Chun decided to call for backup. He wasn't sure exactly why, but his instincts were telling him this situation could escalate. He had learned to trust those instincts over the years, even when he couldn't explain them logically. Unit 47 to dispatch, he said into his radio. I need a backup unit at mile marker 23 on Highway 85, traffic stop with an uncooperative subject. Roberts heard the radio call and felt a chill run down her spine. Uncooperative? She had done everything he asked, answered every question politely, and complied with all his instructions. She began to realize that something was going very wrong. Officer, I think there may be some misunderstanding, she said carefully. I've been completely cooperative. I'm Colonel Diana Roberts, United States Army. I can show you my military identification if that would help clear things up. But Chun had already made up his mind about who he thought she was and what kind of threat she might pose. The mention of being a colonel only reinforced his belief that she was trying to intimidate him with false claims about military rank. Just stay where you are, he said firmly. Don't reach for anything. Robert stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, watching as the situation spiraled beyond her control. She had faced enemy fire in 2 combat deployments, had made life-and-death decisions affecting hundreds of soldiers, had earned the respect of generals and Pentagon officials. But none of that experience had prepared her for this moment on a quiet highway, where her calm professionalism was being interpreted as a threat. The backup unit was on its way, and Chun felt more confident knowing help was coming. He had no idea that the woman standing beside the highway was one of the most respected officers in the United States Army, that she had dedicated her life to serving her country, or that the next few minutes would change everything for both of them forever. The backup patrol car arrived within 10 minutes, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Officer Lisa Martinez stepped out, immediately sensing the tension in the air. She had worked with Chun before and knew he was generally professional. But something about his body language tonight seemed off. Martinez was a 5-year veteran who had built a reputation for being able to calm difficult situations. She had grown up in a military family and understood the unique culture and mindset of service members. As she approached, she could see a black woman standing calmly beside a sedan, her posture straight and controlled. What's the situation? Martinez asked Chun quietly. Traffic stop for speeding, Chun replied, his voice tight. Driver's being uncooperative, claims to be some kind of military officer. Something doesn't feel right about this whole thing. Martinez looked over at Roberts, who was standing exactly where Chun had told her to stay. The woman's hands were visible, she wasn't moving around, and she appeared completely calm. Martinez had seen truly uncooperative subjects before, and this didn't look like one of them. Ma'am, I'm Officer Martinez, she called out. How are you doing tonight? Roberts turned slightly toward the new officer, relief evident in her voice. I'm fine, thank you. I was hoping we could clear up what seems to be a misunderstanding. I'm Colonel Diana Roberts from Fort Hamilton. I was returning from official business in Washington when Officer Chun stopped me for allegedly speeding. Martinez noticed several things immediately. The woman's speech was precise and respectful. She used proper military terminology. Her posture and bearing were consistent with someone who had military training. Most importantly, she wasn't showing any signs of the agitation or deception that Martinez had learned to recognize. Colonel Roberts, Martinez said, "Do you have military identification with you?" "Yes, ma'am. It's in my wallet in the car. I'd be happy to show it to you if Officer Chun gives permission." Chun stepped forward quickly. "Nobody's getting anything from anywhere until I figure out what's going on here. She could have weapons in that vehicle." Martinez felt a growing sense of unease. Chun seemed unusually agitated for what appeared to be a routine traffic stop. She had handled hundreds of these situations, and experienced officers usually didn't get this worked up over a simple speeding ticket. "David," she said quietly, using Chun's first name to try to calm him down, "why don't we just let her show us the ID? If she really is military, we can verify it and wrap this up quickly." But Chun had convinced himself that Roberts was running some kind of game. In his mind, real military officers would have immediately shown their credentials and probably gotten out of the ticket entirely. The fact that she hadn't done that meant she was probably lying about her rank and position. "She's been evasive from the beginning," Chun insisted. "Claims to be a colonel but acts suspicious when I ask simple questions. Military personnel are supposed to be straightforward and honest." Roberts overheard this conversation and felt her frustration growing, though she kept it carefully controlled. She had dealt with misunderstandings before, but never anything quite like this. The irony wasn't lost on her that her military training and staying calm under pressure was actually making the situation worse. "Officers," she said respectfully, "I understand you're just doing your job, but I really do need to get back to base. I have soldiers under my command who depend on me being present for morning briefing. Could we please resolve this quickly?" Chun interpreted her words as an attempt to pressure him, maybe even threaten him with her supposed military connections. "You're not going anywhere until I say you can go. And all this talk about commanding soldiers and morning briefings sounds like you're trying to intimidate me." Martinez looked between Chun and Roberts, sensing that something was going very wrong. She had worked with enough military personnel to know that Roberts' behavior was completely consistent with an actual officer. Military people were trained to be direct, to mention their responsibilities, and to maintain composure under stress. "David," she said more firmly, "I think we should let her show us the military ID. This doesn't need to be complicated." Roberts slowly reached toward her vehicle. "My identification is in my wallet on the passenger seat. I'm going to retrieve it now so we can clear this up. Don't move." Chun shouted suddenly, his hand moving toward his weapon. "I told you not to reach for anything." Roberts immediately froze, her hand halfway toward the car door. "Officer, I'm simply trying to get my identification as requested. I'm not reaching for any weapon or anything dangerous." Martinez stepped between Chun and Roberts, her training kicking in. She could see that Chun was escalating the situation unnecessarily, and that Roberts was genuinely trying to cooperate. "Ma'am, please step back from the vehicle," Martinez said. In a calm but firm voice, "David, let's take a breath here. She's been cooperative this entire time." But Chun was already too deep into his own narrative. He had decided that Roberts was a threat, and every action she took only confirmed his suspicions in his mind. When she moved toward the car, he saw it as aggressive behavior rather than simple compliance with what he thought was a request for identification. "She's not following instructions," Chun said, his voice rising. "She keeps trying to reach into the vehicle after I told her not to. This is exactly the kind of behavior that gets people in trouble." Roberts felt the situation spinning completely out of control. She was a combat veteran who had faced real danger in overseas deployments, but this felt more frightening because it made no sense. She was being treated like a criminal for trying to cooperate with law enforcement. "Officers, please," she said, her voice steady despite her growing alarm. "I'm a United States Army colonel. I have served my country for 15 years. I have never been arrested, never been in trouble with the law. All I want to do is show you my credentials so we can resolve this misunderstanding." Martinez could hear the sincerity in Robert's voice, but she could also see that Chun had made up his mind. Her partner was experiencing something she had seen before in other officers, a kind of tunnel vision that happened when someone became convinced they were dealing with a dangerous situation, even when the evidence didn't support that conclusion. "David, I really think we need to de-escalate this," Martinez said quietly. "She's been nothing but respectful and cooperative. Let's just verify her identity and finish this up." Chun shook his head. "Something's not right here. Real military officers don't act like this. They don't get stopped for speeding and then start making demands about getting back to base and commanding soldiers. She's trying to play us." Roberts realized that no matter what she said or did, Chun had already decided who he thought she was. Her calm military bearing, which had served her well throughout her career, was being interpreted as arrogance or deception. Her attempts to be respectful and follow proper procedures were being seen as manipulation. The highway was empty except for the three of them and their vehicles. The sun had set completely now, and the only light came from the patrol cars' headlights and flashing emergency lights. What should have been a simple traffic stop had turned into something much more dangerous, and Roberts could feel the situation slipping beyond anyone's control. She stood perfectly still, hands visible, trying to project calm while her mind raced through her options. Nothing in her military training had prepared her for being treated as a threat by the very people she had sworn to protect and serve. The tension on Highway 85 had reached a breaking point. 3 people stood in the glow of flashing police lights, each seeing the situation through completely different eyes. What happened next would change all their lives forever. Roberts could feel her heart pounding, but she forced herself to remain calm. Years of military training had taught her to stay composed under pressure, but this was different from anything she had faced in combat zones. At least in Afghanistan, she knew who the enemy was. Here, she was being treated like a threat by people who were supposed to be on the same side. "Officers, I'm going to very slowly reach into my pocket for my military identification card," she announced clearly. "I want to show you my credentials so we can resolve this situation." Martinez nodded, recognizing this as a reasonable request. "That's fine, ma'am. Just move slowly and keep your other hand visible." But Chun was already too far gone. His mind had created a story where Roberts was dangerous, where her calm demeanor was actually a sign of someone planning something. When he saw her hand moving toward her pocket, every alarm bell in his head went off. "No, stop right there!" Chun shouted, his hand moving to his weapon. "I said don't reach for anything." Roberts immediately stopped moving, her hand frozen halfway to her pocket. "Officer, I'm just trying to get my ID. I announced what I was doing. I'm not reaching for a weapon." "David, she's trying to cooperate," Martinez said urgently. She could see the situation was about to spiral completely out of control. "Let her show us the identification." But Chun was operating on pure adrenaline now. In his mind, Roberts had defied his direct orders multiple times. She had tried to intimidate him with claims about military rank. She had been evasive and uncooperative from the beginning. And now she was reaching for something in her pocket, despite his clear instructions not to move. "Step away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them," Chun ordered, drawing his weapon. Roberts felt the world slow down around her. She had been in firefights before, had faced enemy soldiers who actually wanted to kill her. But seeing an American police officer pointing a gun at her while she stood on an American highway was more terrifying than anything she had experienced in 2 combat deployments. "Officer, please," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I am Colonel Diana Roberts, United States Army. I am not armed. I am not a threat to you or anyone else. I was simply trying to show you my identification." Martinez stepped forward, trying to position herself between Chun and Roberts. "David, put the weapon down. She's not a threat. Look at her. She's completely calm. She's following instructions. She's trying to cooperate." But Chun couldn't hear reason anymore. His training had taught him to watch for certain signs of danger, and his experience had taught him to trust his instincts. Unfortunately, his instincts were telling him that Roberts was dangerous, even though all the evidence pointed to the opposite conclusion. Roberts kept her hands visible and spoke in the same calm, authoritative voice she used when commanding. "Troops, Officer Chun, I understand you're concerned about your safety. I respect that. I am going to remain perfectly still while you and Officer Martinez figure out how to proceed." She reached into her pocket very slowly, her movements deliberate and visible. "I'm getting my military ID now. It's a small plastic card, similar to a driver's license." Chun's weapon was still drawn, but Martinez was talking to him in a low, urgent voice. "David, look at her. Really look at her. Does she look like someone who's trying to hurt us? She's been nothing but respectful this entire time." Roberts pulled out a small leather wallet and opened it slowly. Inside was her military identification card, clearly visible. The card showed her photograph, her rank as colonel, and her assignment to Fort Hamilton. Below that was her Bronze Star Medal citation card, which she always carried. "Here is my military identification," she said, holding the wallet open so both officers could see it. "I am Colonel Diana Roberts, commanding officer of the 847th Logistics Battalion. I have been in the Army for 15 years. I have served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. I am not your enemy." Martinez could see the identification clearly from where she stood. The woman was telling the truth. She really was a colonel in the United States Army. All of Chun's suspicions had been wrong from the beginning. "David, she's legit," Martinez said. "Look at the ID. She's a real colonel. We need to stand down." But Chun was struggling to process this information. His mind had been so committed to the idea that Roberts was dangerous that he couldn't immediately accept evidence to the contrary. Instead of relief, he felt confusion and anger. Roberts could see the conflict in Chun's eyes. She had dealt with soldiers suffering from combat stress before, and she recognized the signs of someone whose judgment had been compromised by adrenaline and fear. "Officer Chun," she said gently, "I understand this has been a stressful situation for all of us. Why don't we all take a deep breath and figure out how to move forward?" As she spoke, her cell phone began to ring in her jacket pocket. The sudden sound startled Chun, who was already on edge. Roberts instinctively reached toward the sound, not thinking about how her movement might be interpreted. "I'm sorry, that's my phone," she said, her hand moving toward her jacket. "It's probably my deputy calling to check on my status." The combination of stress, adrenaline, and poor judgment created a perfect storm. Chun saw Roberts reaching toward her jacket, and his mind filled in the blanks with the worst possible scenario. In that split second, he believed she was reaching for a weapon. "Gun!" Chun shouted. Though there was no gun, Martinez spun around, trying to see what Chun was seeing. "Where? I don't see anything." Roberts immediately raised both hands above her head, the phone still ringing in her pocket. "I don't have a gun. I was reaching for my phone." "Officer, I don't have any weapons." But Chun had already made his decision. His weapon was raised, his finger on the trigger, and his mind was convinced that he was in mortal danger. Years of training, had taught him to shoot first and ask questions later when faced with a deadly threat. The phone continued to ring, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Roberts stood perfectly still, her hands raised, her military ID still visible in her open wallet. She had survived roadside bombs, sniper attacks, and enemy ambushes. She had led soldiers through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. But she couldn't survive a traffic stop on an American highway. "Please," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the ringing phone. "I'm not armed. I'm not a threat. I just want to go home." Martinez was shouting at Chun to stand down, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. The world had narrowed to just Chun Roberts and the terrible moment when everything went wrong. The phone stopped ringing. In the sudden silence, Chun's breathing sounded loud and harsh. Roberts remained perfectly still, hoping that the moment would pass, that somehow they could step back from the edge of disaster, but it was already too late. The wheels had been set in motion, and nothing could stop what was about to happen. The first news report appeared on local television at 6 in the morning. "A police officer shot and killed a woman during a traffic stop last night on Highway 85, the anchor read from her script. "The woman has been identified as Diana Roberts. Age 38. Police say the incident is under investigation." What the early reports didn't mention was that Diana Roberts was Colonel Diana Roberts, a decorated Army officer who had dedicated her life to serving her country. That detail would emerge later, and when it did, it would change everything. At Fort Hamilton, Major Kevin Thompson was conducting the morning briefing when his assistant handed him an urgent message. Thompson read it twice before the words fully sank in. Colonel Roberts, his commanding officer, his mentor, the woman who had helped shape his career, was dead. "Sir?" asked Captain Rebecca Lewis, noticing the color drain from Thompson's face. "Is everything okay?" Thompson looked around the room at the dozen officers waiting for him to continue the briefing. These were Roberts' people, soldiers who had served under her command, who respected her leadership and depended on her guidance. "I need to make some phone calls," Thompson said quietly. "We'll resume the briefing in 30 minutes. The news spread through the base like wildfire. Roberts had been popular among the enlisted soldiers and respected by her fellow officers. She was known for caring about her troops, for fighting for their needs, and for always being available when they had problems. By noon, the story had taken on a completely different tone. Roberts' military service record had been released by her family, and the media was beginning to understand who had been killed on that highway. Colonel Diana Roberts wasn't just any Army officer. She was a West Point graduate who had finished in the top 10% of her class. She had served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, where she had been awarded the Bronze Star for valor. She had been recommended for promotion to general and was being considered for a position at the Pentagon. More importantly, she was a mother. Her 2 children, ages 12 and 14, were staying with their grandmother while they tried to understand why their mother wasn't coming home. The initial police report had described the shooting as justified, claiming that Roberts had been non-compliant and potentially dangerous. But when her family demanded to see the body camera footage, a different story began to emerge. The footage showed Roberts being polite and respectful throughout the entire encounter. It showed her complying with every instruction, trying repeatedly to show her military identification, and attempting to de-escalate the situation. Most damaging of all, it showed her final moments with her hands raised, clearly stating that she was unarmed. Officer Martinez, who had been present during the shooting, found herself in an impossible position. She had tried to prevent the tragedy, had attempted to calm Chun down, and had witnessed the entire sequence of events. Her report contradicted many of the details in Chun's account. Subject was cooperative throughout the encounter, Martinez wrote in her official statement. Subject identified herself as military personnel and attempted to provide identification. I observed no threatening behavior or evidence of weapons. The discrepancies between the two police reports created a firestorm of controversy. Whitehead. Chun described Roberts as uncooperative when the video clearly showed her following instructions. Why had he claimed she was reaching for a weapon when she was obviously reaching for her phone? Detective Patricia Valdez was assigned to lead the investigation. A 20-year veteran of the police force, Valdez had investigated dozens of officer-involved shootings. Most of them had been clear-cut cases where the use of force was justified. This case was different. Valdez spent hours reviewing the body, camera footage, interviewing witnesses, and examining the physical evidence. The more she learned about Diana Roberts, the more troubled she became. Roberts had no criminal record. She had never been arrested, never been in trouble with the law. Her military service record was exemplary. Her soldiers described her as fair, professional, and dedicated to their welfare. She was scheduled to speak at a veterans event the following week about leadership in service. The investigation also revealed troubling patterns in Chun's behavior. Over the past 3 years, he had been involved in 5 excessive force complaints. 4 of them involved black suspects. In each case, Chun had claimed the suspects were uncooperative or threatening, but the evidence didn't always support his version of events. "We're looking at a pattern of behavior here," Valdez told her supervisor. "This wasn't an isolated incident. Officer Chun has a history of escalating situations unnecessarily, particularly with black suspects." The military launched its own investigation parallel to the civilian inquiry. General Patricia Wade, Roberts' former commander, personally oversaw the military's review of the case. "Diana Roberts was one of the finest officers I ever had the privilege to serve with," General Wade said in a statement. "She was a leader, a patriot, and a dedicated mother. Her death is not just a loss to her family, but to the entire military community." The contrast between Roberts' exemplary service record and Chun's history of complaints created a narrative that resonated far beyond the local community. Social media posts about the case began going viral, shared by veterans, military families, and civil rights advocates. "She served her country with honor for 15 years, read one widely shared post. "She survived 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan. She earned a Bronze Star for valor. And she died on an American highway during a routine traffic stop." The case began attracting national attention when prominent military leaders spoke out. Retired generals, Medal of Honor recipients, and veterans organizations all demanded justice for Roberts and accountability for the officers involved. "This is not just about one tragic incident," said retired General Michael Harrison in a television interview. "This is about how we treat the men and women who volunteer to serve our country." Colonel Roberts dedicated her life to protecting America, and America failed to protect her. The protests began small, with a few dozen people gathering outside the police station. But they grew larger as more details emerged. Active duty soldiers began joining the demonstrations, many wearing their uniforms, a rare occurrence that signaled the depth of feeling within the military community. "She was one of us," said Staff Sergeant Jennifer Martinez, no relation to the officer who had witnessed the shooting. "She wore the same uniform, took the same oath, served the same country. If this could happen to a colonel, it could happen to any of us." The case also raised questions about police training and procedures. Why hadn't Chun recognized Roberts' military bearing and professionalism? Why had he interpreted her calm demeanor as threatening rather than cooperative? Why had the department initially tried to justify the shooting? Police Chief Robert Williams found himself under intense scrutiny. The department's initial handling of the case, including attempts to suppress portions of the body camera footage, had created a credibility problem that wouldn't go away. "We are committed to a thorough and transparent investigation," Williams said in a press conference. "We will follow the evidence wherever it leads, and we will hold accountable anyone who violated department policy or the law." But the damage to the department's reputation was already done. The contrast between Roberts' stellar service record and Chun's troubled history had created a narrative that was difficult to counter. The body camera footage had shown the world exactly what had happened on that highway, and no amount of official statements could change what people had seen with their own eyes. As the investigation continued, one thing became clear: Diana Roberts' death would not be forgotten or ignored. Her sacrifice in service to her country had earned her the right to justice, and the military community was determined to see that she received it. The courthouse steps were packed with people holding signs and wearing military uniforms. After 6 months of investigation, the trial of Officer David Chen was finally beginning. The crowd included veterans from multiple wars, active duty soldiers who had taken leave to attend, and family members of other victims of police violence. Inside the courtroom, Diana Roberts' mother sat in the front row, flanked by her 2 grandchildren. 12-year-old Michael and 14-year-old Ashley had grown up fast in the months since their mother's death. They still didn't fully understand why someone had killed their mom, but they knew she had been trying to help make things better for other people. The prosecution team was led by District Attorney Rachel Cooper, a former military lawyer who had volunteered to take the case personally. Cooper had served alongside officers like Roberts and understood the military culture that Chun had so badly misinterpreted. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Cooper began her opening statement, "this case is about a good person who died for no reason." Colonel Diana Roberts was driving home from serving her country when she encountered Officer David Chun. She did everything right. She followed every instruction. She was polite, respectful, and cooperative, and she died anyway. The defense attorney, James Mitchell, faced an almost impossible task. The body camera footage clearly showed that Roberts had not been threatening or aggressive. But Mitchell's job was to defend his client, so he focused on Chun's state of mind and the split-second decisions that police officers have to make. Officer Chun believed he was in danger, Mitchell argued. He made a mistake, yes, but it was an honest mistake made under pressure. Police officers have to make life-or-death decisions in seconds, and sometimes those decisions are wrong. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The most powerful testimony came from Officer Martinez, who had been present during the shooting. She had struggled for months with what she had witnessed, and her voice shook as she described the events of that night. "Colonel Roberts was trying to cooperate," Martinez testified. "She was calm, professional, respectful. She told us multiple times that she was a military officer. She tried to show us her identification. I kept telling my partner that she wasn't a threat, but he wouldn't listen." The body camera footage was played multiple times during the trial. Each viewing made Chun's actions look worse. The jury could see Roberts raising her hands, hear her calm voice explaining that she was unarmed, watch her trying desperately to de-escalate a situation that made no sense. The most damaging evidence came from Chun's own police reports from previous incidents. The prosecution showed a pattern of excessive force complaints, all involving black suspects, all describing the same kinds of threatening behavior that Chun claimed to see in Roberts. "Officer Chun sees threats where none exist," Cooper argued. During her closing statement, his own records show a pattern of escalating peaceful encounters into violent confrontations. Colonel Roberts died because Officer Chang brought his prejudices and fears to what should have been a routine traffic stop. Expert witnesses testified about implicit bias in policing, explaining how unconscious prejudices can affect an officer's perception of threat. They showed studies proving that black suspects are more likely to be perceived as dangerous, even when exhibiting identical behavior to white suspects. Dr. Angela Thompson, a psychology professor who specialized in police behavior, explained how Chun's mind had created a false narrative about Roberts. Officer Chun decided very early in the encounter that Ms. Roberts was dangerous, Dr. Thompson testified. Once he made that decision, He interpreted everything she did through that lens. Her calm demeanor became suspicious. Her attempts to cooperate became uncooperative. Her military bearing became threatening. This is a classic example of confirmation bias leading to tragic consequences. The defense tried to argue that Chun had been acting according to his training, that he had genuinely feared for his life. But the prosecution pointed out that Martinez, who had the same training and was present at the same scene, had not perceived any threat from Roberts. During his testimony, Chun appeared genuinely remorseful, but his attempts to explain his actions only made things worse. When asked why he had described Roberts as uncooperative in his initial report, Chun struggled to provide a coherent answer. She seemed resistant, Chun said, not following instructions the way she should have. What instructions did she not follow? Cooper asked. Chun paused for a long moment. She kept trying to tell me she was a colonel. She kept bringing up the military. It seemed like she was trying to intimidate me. So attempting to identify herself as a military officer was intimidating to you. It felt like she was trying to pull rank or something. The exchange highlighted the fundamental problem with Chun's perception. Roberts' attempts to provide relevant information about herself had been interpreted as threats or manipulation. The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching their verdict. When they returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Roberts' family held hands in the front row, while Chun sat stone-faced at the defense table. On the charge of manslaughter in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty. The jury foreman announced. The courtroom erupted. Roberts' mother began crying, while supporters cheered and applauded. Chun showed no emotion as the additional charges were read: violations and filing a false police report. Guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, several people spoke about the impact of Roberts' death. Her commanding officer, Major Thompson, described the hole her loss had left in the military community. Colonel Roberts was more than just an officer, Thompson said. She was a mentor, a leader, and a friend. Her soldiers trusted her because she genuinely cared about their welfare. The Army lost one of its best when she died. Roberts' daughter, Ashley, now 15, stood up to address the court. Her voice was steady, but tears ran down her cheeks as she spoke. My mom always told us that serving in the Army meant protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, Ashley said. She spent 15 years doing that job. She survived 2 wars. But she couldn't survive a traffic stop in her own country. That's not right. Judge William Harrison sentenced Chun to 15 years in prison, the maximum allowed under the sentencing guidelines. The defendant's actions resulted in the death of a dedicated public servant who had devoted her life to protecting others, Harrison said. His subsequent attempts to justify those actions through false statements compounded the tragedy. The case had broader implications beyond Chun's conviction. Roberts' death became a catalyst for police reform initiatives across the country. The Diana Roberts Act was introduced in Congress, requiring enhanced training for law enforcement on de-escalation techniques and implicit bias recognition. Military bases began offering voluntary training sessions for local police departments, helping officers better understand military culture and communication styles. The goal was to prevent future misunderstandings like the one that had cost Roberts her life. Roberts was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Hundreds of soldiers attended the ceremony, along with generals, veterans, and family members. The eulogy was delivered by General Wade, who had known Roberts since her days as a young lieutenant. Diana Roberts embodied the best of what it means to serve, General Wade said. She was brave in combat, dedicated in peacetime, and committed to the soldiers under her command. Her death reminds us that the fight for justice and equality is not over, and that we must continue her work. Roberts' children received full military education benefits and ongoing support from the Army community. Her son Michael, inspired by his mother's example, announced his intention to attend West Point when he graduated from high school. The legacy of Diana Roberts lived on in the reforms her death had sparked, in the soldiers she had trained and mentored, and in the two children who carried her memory forward. Her death had been a tragedy, but it had also become a call to action that would protect others from suffering the same fate.